Off the record, until now, two men, strangers to each other, with stories they swore they'd never tell. One, a retired federal investigator, sent into a canyon corner that isn't on the tourist maps, where voices echoed back too perfectly. The other, a lone hiker who stepped past the sign into the forbidden zone and found marks on stone and something that followed him home. Different trails, different times, but the same warnings, the same vanishing evidence, and the same cold understanding. Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. Now prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. In places our maps blur on purpose, the stories don't. A retired federal investigator writes in, saying he kept one file locked in his head because paper was never going to be safe enough. Tonight, he breaks the seal. If you have any information or witnessed something yourself, please leave it in the comments below. We need to know. I've never told anyone this before because it still haunts me and because I like my pension. I'm a retired special agent from the Investigative Services branch. My cases were always the ones that didn't fit in the visitor center brochures, missing persons where the grid searches came back empty, poaching, and vandalism. I won't name the park. I won't name the district or the people still working the job. What I can tell you is this happened in late March, a shoulder season when the snow is still patchy up high and the afternoons are warm enough to make the trails greasy. The terrain is high plateau and canyon country, juniper, scrub oak on the flats with vertical sandstone walls that swallow sound. You can probably guess the region. We rolled on a call about a missing backcountry permit holder, 38-year-old male, solo, known to do off-route explorations. His car was at a remote trailhead off a washboard road. The maintenance guys only graded once a year. There was a late-season cold snap forecast, daytime in the 40s, nights below freezing, gusts strong enough to knock you off your feet if you got cute near an edge. It should have been a standard search. Start at the last known point, talk to the folks who saw him sign the permit, follow the obvious drainages. But nothing about the permit looked right to me. Under itinerary, he'd written only caves, plural. We don't have many caves there. We have holes and overhangs and a few slot narrows that see water only when the sky decides to knock. But caves? That smelled like a dare. Day one, we put boots in the dirt. The sand had taken a beating from the wind, but a mile down the trail we found prints stepping off into crusted cryptobiotic soil. Anyone who's hiked the desert knows you don't do that unless you're ignorant or you think the rules don't apply. The stride was regular, then elongated like he started to move fast downhill, then stopped and cut left across slick rock. No treads to follow, just scuffs and a sense of direction. There were three of us. Me, a younger ranger from the district, good kid who took notes like they were going to come alive and argue with him, and a veteran SAR volunteer named Ray who'd been finding people in these gulches for 2 decades. We had radios, maps, and habits that keep you alive, like calling out your footing, announcing when you lose the trail, repeating back the last thing you heard on comms so you don't put words in anyone's mouth. By late afternoon, clouds starting to stack, we found his first camp, if that's what you want to call it. No tent, no sleeping pad. He'd laid out a mylar bivvy under an overhang and ringed the mouth with a line of pebbles like a kid making a boundary. In the sand, arranged carefully, were shapes, triangles nested inside larger triangles, a spiral with a break in it, and a stick figure missing its head. If I'd found that in a campground, I would have rolled my eyes and told someone to grow up. Ray grunted. Nobody sleeps without a pad out here unless they're too tired or too scared to make camp proper. I walked the perimeter. The wind was shifting, bringing the smell of wet clay up from the wash below. I saw where he'd tried to start a fire and then put it out before it took. Footprints circling, then a set of longer, deeper impressions that weren't his. I'm not proud to admit my heart did a little stutter. We marked the coordinates, took photos, and made the call to press on for another hour before we lost the light. We moved into a maze of fins and narrows that make you feel like you're walking through the ribs of something enormous. On the radio, our dispatcher's voice thinned out with static every time we dipped, which is typical out there, but this had a cadence to it, like syllables were being clipped on purpose. Twice I heard my own call sign come back to me with a half-second delay, like an echo that learned to talk. At dusk, we found the blood. It was fresh enough to be tacky. Not much at first, just a flick on a rock edge where something had slipped. 40 yards farther, a smear on the wall about shoulder height, as if something brushed against it, passing too close. No fur, no hair. A few scuffs in the sand that didn't match deer or elk. I can tell the difference between dropping a heel because you're tired and dropping it because your center of gravity is wrong. This was wrong. The impressions were too long, with a high toe pressure like the foot was reaching. I looked at Ray. He shook his head once and did the gesture we all know for eyes up. "We're being watched," I said, without meaning to say it out loud. The younger ranger laughed too high. "By who? Tourists with night vision?" "Not a who," Ray said. "A what?" We decided to camp above the wash on a flat bit of slick rock, windbreak, good visibility. We turned our headlamps red and kept them low. I called in our location. The reply came back. It was the dispatcher's voice, but not from my radio, like it was standing just beyond. I tried our inReach, pinged a check-in. It sent. The return ping came from somewhere below us, in the dark, too fast for a satellite loop. You learn to keep your hands busy when your head starts to spool. I set the stove up and boiled water. The flame shivered in a way that didn't match the wind. Ray unrolled his bag, slid in with his boots on, and told a long, slow story about a man who walked off a trail one October and turned up 4 months later in a hole. It wasn't comforting. The kid tried to call his fiancée and got nothing but a high whine that made all three of us wince. Around 2 in the morning, the temperature dropped hard. Frost crawled over our breath. Something moved down in the wash. Careful, calculated. Not a trot, not the hop of a rabbit. The long, quiet set of someone planting each foot like it mattered where the weight went. You know the sound of a hand brushing cotton. It was like that, repeated, as if something was testing the sand with a palm. I got my light. Ray reached out and grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said. "If it wants light, it's getting enough from the moon." At 3, the voice started. First it was the younger rangers. I mean his exact voice, too clear to be a trick of echo. Calling my name from the wash. Not my call sign, my name. The kid was asleep next to me, his breath making a wet sound I didn't like. I shook him awake, put a hand over his mouth before he could say "what," and pointed down. The voice called again. My name, then Ray's name, as in, "I know you're here." Ray's hand went to the little neck knife he wears on a loop even in his bag. The kid's eyes were so wide the whites flashed in the starlight. We didn't answer. The calling went on for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped. I thought that would be the worst of it. I was wrong. A little before dawn, we found the second camp. We were packing up when the kid stepped to the edge to pee and said, "Agent, you need to see this." There was a ledge below us we hadn't noticed, shadowed, but as the light came up you could see a shallow alcove with soot on the ceiling. In the middle of that alcove was our missing permit holder, or what was left of him. He was not whole. His torso was angled upward, propped on his pack like he'd been sitting and someone took offense. His neck looked too long. His arms were arranged palms up. His legs, it was as if they'd been put on backward and then left that way. Around him in the dust, more of those shapes, but different now, The triangles closed, the spiral complete, a circle with 3 slashes through it. He had written, carved really with the tip of a tent stake, 3 words into the sandstone, "Don't look up." Ray held my sleeve so hard his knuckles blanched. The kid whispered, "We should look up, because that is exactly what a brain does when someone tells it not to." I didn't. I took a breath that didn't go anywhere, and I stepped back from the edge. We documented. Photos, GPS. I radioed in a body discovery with minimal descriptors and requested a full response. Medic staged, LE coroner. The voice on the other end identified herself as our dispatcher, used the right codes, asked for our coordinates twice, like she was pretending to write them down. She called me by name. Then, before she unkeyed, I heard the sound of a tongue clicking against teeth. 3 times, like a metronome starting a song. Our dispatcher doesn't do that. We did what we've all been trained to do when a scene is wrong. We backed out the way we came. We flagged our route low and subtle so a medical team could find it, but nothing else would be drawn in. We spoke in numbers and codes, and we were just trying to make our voices less like our voices. I told the kid, no hero moves. I told Ray, if I go weird in the eyes, you hit me with the spray and you drag me like I'm drunk. He nodded like he'd been waiting his whole life for the permission to do exactly that. We made it 50 yards before the rock above us hissed, not like a rattlesnake, like air being pulled through teeth. I still did not look up. The kid did. He made a sound I've heard men make when they see a car coming toward them in their lane, and there's no shoulder. He fell onto his ass and scrambled, left heel dragging a bright streak in the dust. Ray grabbed my collar and pushed me against the wall as pebbles clicked down around us, little rolling sounds like fingernails tapping. It moved. Again I saw it. There were too many joints. Skin was like wet stone, pale not like lack of sun, but like something that had been under pressure a long time. Its head was there and then not there. What I remember most clearly were the eyes when they chose to be eyes, black like hole burns in paper. It lowered itself the way a spider does, except there was no line above it, no gear, just those hands finding holds on rock where there weren't holds. It didn't rush. That was the worst part. It had patience. It had the certainty of a thing that had gotten exactly what it wanted before, many times. It said my name again in my voice. It came out of the radio, out of the kid's mouth while he clamped his lips shut, out of the space behind my left ear. I said nothing. Ray did something I love him for and hate him for. He took out his whistle and blew it with every breath. The sound ricocheted in the slot. The thing flinched. Not much, but enough. That was our cue. We moved, backed under an overhang where the angle forced anything above to show itself. We went single file, slow, calm, as if that helps. The kid started to cry without sound, and I told him to save it for the truck and kept my eyes on the rock. The thing followed us. I could hear it aligning with our steps. When we stopped, it stopped. When we moved, it moved. Sometimes its hands got ahead of it and I could see the tips of its fingers. No nails. In one tight bend, it got close enough that I could smell it. It wasn't rot. It wasn't animal. It was like wet granite and ozone, like the air under a waterfall, and something faintly electric, like the inside of a TV when you used to feel static on the screen. We came to a pour-over we'd slid down. It was 6 feet maybe. We would have to turn our backs to the ceiling to climb. Ray went first. I tossed his pack up. His eyes left mine. They widened in a way I've never seen. Ray said very softly, "Do not look," and that was enough. I didn't. The kid went up. Then me. Last was Ray. My radio popped and the thing made the sound back at us, shrill and perfect. Then it laughed. Not a person's laugh, not an animal's. It sounded like a bandsaw. We made the rim by mid-morning. I called in our position and asked again for the response team. The voice that answered used the right words. It said, "Affirmative." And then my name. Then, polite as you please, it said the younger ranger's fiance's name. We had never spoken her name on the radio. We didn't sit down until we could see the vehicle tracks from the maintenance crew on the flat. We didn't talk about what we saw. For the record, I was not brave. I kept thinking about those triangles and the spiral with the break in it. And part of me, that part that reads reports at 2 a.m. and looks up words in old languages, wondered if the missing hiker had been trying to warn us. That's when the helicopters came. Not ours. These came in low and fast. Dark birds, no numbers where you could see them from the ground. They didn't circle. They went straight over our canyon, 1, 2, and then out, barely clearing the fin of rock that always catches the unwary pilot. 5 minutes later, my phone, which had been a dead for 24 hours, buzzed. Text from a number I didn't know. Our coordinates and the word hold. I didn't hold. I got my team to the truck. At the trailhead, we found a taped-off staging area that hadn't been there when we parked. Sawhorses, piles of kit, a command tent with a laminated org chart no one had bothered to write names on yet. A man in an unmarked windbreaker met us, smiling, friendly, with that way of knowing your name without asking. He said his agency fast and quiet. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the county sheriff. He told me I'd done exactly right by calling in. He asked for our report right then. I gave him the basics: body in an alcove, potential climbing fall, post-mortem disturbance possible. I did not mention the voice. I did not mention the hand. Ray stared at the ground like if he made eye contact, he'd have to agree with something. The kid clutched the tailgate and looked like he might bolt. The windbreaker guy nodded at all the right places. He offered us hot food and a cot. I said we needed to go back to the district. He said we should stay for a debrief. I said we'd come back for the debrief when he had a case number and a name. 2 days later, the official report said our missing permit holder died from exposure and positional asphyxia after falling from a boulder. The photos I'd taken on a government phone, the ones with the symbols, did not populate in the evidence management system. Metadata only, no image. The audio logs of our radio traffic from that night were missing 15 minutes between 2:58 and 3:13. The dispatcher swore she'd never called me by my first name on a channel. She doesn't do that. Ray and I met in my garage the next week. He brought coffee and said he wasn't sleeping much. He showed me a napkin where he'd drawn the spiral with the break. His hand shook so hard it looked like he had 2 lines for every line. "You ever see that before?" he asked. "Only in places where someone wanted to make a boundary," I said, "and in one old book that probably should have been burned." "You believe in that stuff?" he said, not mocking, genuinely asking. "No," I said, and then I said that I only believe in evidence. That same week, 2 rock climbers posted blurry photos of weird soot in a side canyon and then took them down an hour later. A maintenance worker told me the command tent at the trailhead stayed up 2 nights past when the body went out, and the generator ran both nights. And then someone came and collected the generator in the tent, but left the stakes in the ground like they wanted to see if anyone noticed. An old-timer from the nearby town said he'd heard the laughing thing out in the draws when he was a kid, and his grandfather told him to spit over his left shoulder and keep walking. A woman who cleans cabins for a private outfitter said she found triangles of pebbles under 3 beds. I filed my report the way we're supposed to. I got a friendly call from someone higher up who told me I'd done a professional job, that media interest had been preemptively contextualized, and that if anyone asked, this was a tragedy made worse by weather. 6 weeks later, I got a performance review that used phrases like adherence to narrative and escalation discipline, words you don't want in a line of work where telling the truth used to be the only currency. I retired early the following year because my wife and I got tired of having strangers calling and asking questions. I still get the occasional text from numbers I don't know with coordinates. They trend toward the edges of maps. I don't go. I don't answer. If you're waiting for a moral, I don't have one. If you're waiting for me to name the thing, I won't. I will tell you this much. The spiral with the break isn't complete until you make it complete. The triangles are open until they're not. Whatever we saw, it wanted us inside the lines. It wanted to finish something using us as the last piece. I know what you expect me to say here. Don't go into the backcountry alone. That's good advice, but it doesn't help. If you find a place that feels like it's listening, leave it alone. Back away. Don't say your name out loud, not even to the person next to you. Some places aren't fenced with rails and signs. They're fenced with silence, rumors, and the people who learn the hard way to stop asking questions. In this story, a hiker writes in about the cutout place on the big desert map where the canyon goes quiet. Have you heard of the forbidden zone at the canyon? There is so much speculation. I want to know what's really out there. If you have any details, leave them in the comments below. I'm not a writer. I work in facilities for a school district. I plan my days, I fix things, I make lists. I've done a lot of backpacking out west, and I thought I understood weather, terrain, and how not to get in trouble. I was wrong. We all know the park. High desert, a giant river, big drops, old rock. The time was late October last year. Daytime around 55, nights in the 30s. Dry air that pulls the water out of you even when you're not sweating. I had 4 days off and a backcountry permit for 2 nights. I planned to sleep one night at a legal site and then day hike farther on the second day without pushing it. That was the plan. I'm going to use the phrase forbidden zone because that's what people call it online and at a couple of gas stations near the south entrance. I also heard about it from a shuttle driver months before, but he called it the cutout. He said the map looks whole until you notice how trails pass by a huge section of side canyons and then bend away. He said you see it better on certain satellite views where the textures look different. When I asked him why it's closed, he shrugged and said, resource protection. Then he said people argue about what that means. Rare plants, sensitive archaeology, bad rock, old mines, a sinkhole, radiation. Online, the rumors get worse. Buried chambers, bodies in cloth, carvings, a federal agency that isn't the Park Service with cameras that nobody sees, people who went off trail and didn't come back, people who came back and moved away without their forwarding address, a few posts from river guides who talk around something and then delete what they wrote after the comments go off the rails. Skeptics always jump in. They say the rock there is soft and dangerous, the drainages are confusing, the maps are old, and that's enough reason to close an area. They point to rescue reports and say it's about budgets and liability. Maybe they're right about most of it. Maybe the rest needs a different word. The first odd story I heard in person was from a guy I met at a hardware store in a town near the East Gate 2 summers back. He recognized my pack on my truck and asked me where I was headed. We got to talking and he said his cousin worked trail crew years ago. The cousin and 2 others flagged a line for a possible stock trail on the north side of the river that would have cut hours between 2 primitive zones. They quit the project halfway through and were reassigned. The guy didn't say why. He only said his cousin started sleeping with a radio on after that and never camped in the backcountry again. I thought he was just telling a story. I'm not a thrill seeker. I'm not proud of what I did. I stayed in bounds on day 1. I ate dinner and read in my tent and slept hard. On day 2, I packed a day kit to walk to an overlook that my permit allowed. The sky was clear. The wind was steady. I had a spot device, a compass, a paper map, and my phone with the map cached. At the overlook, there was a sign on a post with the usual message, closed area beyond this point. It used the resource protection phrase. I stood there a long time. I didn't cross right away. I told myself I'd go 50 yards to take a picture from a different angle and come back. I told myself it was late season with very few people. I told myself footprints would be obvious in dust and sand, and I could step in my own on the way back. The ground beyond the sign felt different under my boots. That is a fact, not a dramatic line. The crust of the soil held together until my heel left it, and then it broke. The junipers stood farther apart. There were old fire rings filled with carefully placed rocks, heavier than they needed to be, stacked without gaps. I couldn't tell if that meant cleanup by trail crew or something else. I followed a shallow drainage around a sandstone knoll. The map showed a dry side canyon beyond it, with a pour-off you could see from the legal overlook. The rumor posts talk about the side canyons more than the main gorge. People say the little canyons are where you find the strange things. People say to watch the ledges. I was half a mile past the sign when I saw the first mark. On the wall of the drainage, at about chest level, someone had rubbed a dark stain in a shape. It wasn't paint. It looked like ash mixed with water and oil. The shape was a figure with arms and legs and a head, but the head was pointed, and there were 3 dots where an eye would be, stacked in a column. Below the figure was a short line that stopped and then started again in 2 right angles. It reminded me of a trap diagram. I took a photo and told myself it was an old miner's joke or a modern camper's idea of a prank. I kept going. The second mark showed up 200 yards later. It was the same figure, smaller, with a row of tiny circles behind it. I stuck my finger in a circle. It had grit in it. The grit caught under my nail and I smelled something metallic. I wiped my hand on my pant leg and told myself I would turn around after I saw the pour-off from the top. The top of that side canyon is flat slick rock with shallow pockets that hold water from storms. The pockets were dry. The pour-off is a straight drop. I crawled to the edge to look down. There is a bench halfway with a cedar on it. The cedar had strips of cloth tied in the branches. Many colors faded. I know that means different things in different places. Prayers, memorials, marker for a route. None of those made me feel better in that moment. I heard a stone slide behind me. I turned so fast I scraped my palm. No one was there. Then I heard it again, farther off. I stayed still and listened. The wind pushed once and then stopped. The canyon held its breath. That's when the thought hit hard and fast. I was being watched. I scanned the ledges above and found a shadow where there shouldn't have been one. It moved, not fast, not slow. It reformed in a new crack. I told myself it was a bird, though I knew birds don't do that against rock without giving themselves away. The path ended at a shallow alcove where the roof was smoke black. Against the back wall were 3 shapes on the floor made of pebbles. I didn't recognize the arrangement. It was 3 bars set parallel, then a gap, then 2 bars crossing at the ends, then a single bar by itself. The stones were clean without dust on top of them, which meant someone placed them recently or someone had brushed them. The ceiling above the stones had scratches. Not writing, not pictures. More like someone pressing their fingers upward until a layer of soot came off. I said out loud, "I should leave." I stepped back. My heel touched something soft. I turned again. It was a small pile of fur. Tufts, cream and tan, no skin attached, no blood. The tips were burnt. I could smell the burnt ends. The pile was arranged in a curve. Above it, on the wall, the figure with the pointed head had been drawn bigger and darker, and the 3 eye dots had lines running down from them. Not straight, more like drips, but thicker. I realized my hand was shaking. I left the alcove and headed for the open ground that led back to the boundary. I told myself I would follow my own tracks out and go straight to the ranger station and explain that I had made a mistake. I would show the photos. I would deal with the ticket. By then, the sun had shifted and the light hid the shallow edges. I felt angry at myself for not marking the exit better. I felt watched again, but this time it felt closer. I heard a bird call, a jay, 2 notes and a string of chatter. Then the same call, but with a wrong break in the middle, as if someone was repeating it from a recording with bad timing. Then I heard my first name in my father's voice. which is not possible because he has been dead for years. I kept walking and my legs wanted to run and I did not let them. I said, "Stop it," which is not something I have ever said to empty air before. Then my first name again, this time in my own voice, same pacing I use when I talk to myself at work. I know how this sounds. This is so strange. I started seeing the same mark on walls and boulders. The pointed head figure, the three-eyed dots, the broken trap shape, then a new one, a circle with a gap at the top and a line across the gap. My phone lost orientation and showed me rotated 90 degrees to the canyon. I checked my compass and it spun once and then settled. I picked a landmark, a flat-topped butte with a notch, and kept it on my left. The wash turned and turned. The wind died. No insects, no bird noise. Then a low throat sound in front of me. Not a growl, not a known animal. A steady exhale that didn't vary. I crouched and scanned the rim of the wash. I saw a shape on the next rise that didn't match any plant I knew. It rose up from behind a flat rock. It unfolded with joints that weren't in the right place. I don't know a better way to say that without comparing it to something else. It had a head and a chest and long limbs. The hands opened and closed without sound. The fingers were long, the head angled. No eyes at first. Then the eyes showed up. Black. They absorbed the light. They didn't shine. The mouth opened slowly. The teeth were small and sharp, and the rows didn't match. It did not blink. I couldn't tell if the skin was hairless or if the hairs were fine and colorless. The surface looked smooth and wrong in the sun. It didn't sway. It held very still. It said my name a third time, lower. The voice came from the wrong place. The sound was right in my ears. Then it said my last name. I fell forward onto my hands and I broke the skin on my right palm on a flake of rock. I didn't even feel it. I got up and walked backward and then turned and walked fast without running. I wanted to run. My body didn't trust running on that surface. I kept my steps steady. I didn't look back right away. When I did, it was gone from the rise. The wash was empty. That's when I noticed the whispering. It wasn't words. It was the sound of lips and tongue without volume. It was everywhere and nowhere. I smelled something salty and sour and a little like a wet electrical box. I know that makes no sense, but it's what I smelled. The whispering grew. The sun hit a ridge and threw shadow down the wash. That's when it stepped into view at the bend ahead. It came out of the shadow. It went down on all fours and then up again. It moved wrong, too precise in one moment and then slack in the next. It tilted its head toward me without lowering it. It smiled. That was the worst part. The eyes didn't change. When it was 30 feet away, it spoke again. It used my mother's voice this time. It said my name the way she says it when she gets worried but tries not to show it. Then it tried to laugh. I pulled the bear spray. It isn't meant for that place, but I carry it anyway. I slid off the safety and kept my feet planted. The thing stopped, head tilted. It made a clicking in the throat. The sound reminded me of the way someone tests a pen against paper. It took one more step. I aimed at the face and pressed the trigger. The wind shifted and brought some of it back into my face, and I coughed hard, and my eyes watered. The thing backed away, but not in pain. It tasted the air, its tongue pointed and thin. It made a sound like a sigh. Its skin tightened, and the eyes went from open black to narrower black. It moved sideways, and then behind a rock, and then I didn't see it. The whispering stopped. The silence felt heavy. I broke the line of the wash and found the open flats and then the legal boundary. I thought the sign would make me feel better. I saw the post. The sign had been turned so it faced away from the trail. I don't know how long it had been like that. There was a sticker slapped on the back of the sign. It had the same pointed head figure on it, in black on white. Someone had printed these. It wasn't a scribble. I peeled it off and stuck it in my pocket, and then threw it away later, and now I wish I hadn't. I made it back to the legal campground just before dark. A guided group had set up 3 sites over. Their leader was fixing stoves under a tarp. I walked up to him and asked if he'd ever heard about the closed area beyond the sign. His face didn't change. He said the area was closed for resource protection. He said people get lost when they cut across the benches and think they're saving time. He said there are archaeological resources that need protection. I asked him if he'd ever seen marks on the rock walls of a small figure with 3 eye dots. He looked at the ground and said nothing. I went to my tent. My hands shook while I zipped the door. I heard the group eat and talk. I didn't cook dinner. I ate 2 bars and drank a liter of water. Then I heard it again. My name, quiet, at the edge of camp. Not from the group. The voice said, "Can you help me?" in my own voice. Then a second voice said, "I'm cold," in my father's voice. This went on for a while. I thought I was losing my mind. At some point, I fell asleep. In the morning, I went to the ranger station and told the ranger on duty that I had crossed into a closed area and was sorry, and that I had photos of vandalism and signs of something I didn't understand. I expected a lecture and a fine. I got neither. The ranger asked my name and checked something on the computer, and then said he would take my statement. He asked me to transfer the photos to a thumb drive. He took them into a back room. He came out 20 minutes later and said the files were corrupt and asked if I could try again. I tried again. The photos copied, and then the folder showed as empty. I offered to show him on my phone. He said the station has a policy about personal devices. He took notes on paper while I talked. His hand was steady. His face was calm. When I said I heard my name in my father's voice, he just wrote it down. He told me to wait outside. He made a call in the office. I could hear parts through the wall. He said my name. He said the date. He said, "Closed section near the side canyon pour-off." Then he used a number I didn't recognize. He said, "Marks on stone, the usual figure, 3 points," and then he lowered his voice and I couldn't hear him. I went home the same day. That night I woke up at 3 to my phone buzzing. Unknown number. I didn't answer. The voicemail transcription said, "Hi," and then my first name. It said, "Are you awake?" It was just strange. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a ranger from a different district who said he was following up on reports of vandalism and wanted to clarify a few items. He asked for the exact shape of the figure and if the dots were stacked or side by side. He asked for the number of stone arrangements in the alcove and if any of them had gaps. He asked if I saw any words carved or scratched anywhere. I said no, only marks and pictures. He said thank you, and that was it. I asked him if anyone else had reported the same thing. He paused and then said he couldn't comment on other cases. I don't think I am the only one who has stepped around a sign and found something that wasn't meant for me. I wish I knew what I saw that day. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.